guns, and money. Send lawyers, guns, and money.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Conduct Detrimental. This is episode 72. You'll remember my voice, Dan Lust. Dan Wallach is on a very super secret assignment, I've been told might change the sports betting world forever. I'm paraphrasing, but Dan said it's very important and it has to do with, obviously, sports betting because that's what he does. So last episode, we were joined by Mike Lawson, and Mike is back with us. And Mike, why don't you say hi before I introduce our other guest for the show?
Dan, good to be back. Thanks for having me again.
Alongside Mike is the fourth member of Conduct Detrimental. That's Taryn Sharma, who you will have heard maybe on the Minnesota Live episode because Taryn was emceeing it. Taryn, welcome to Conduct Detrimental, a first for you, my friend.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited to be able to be here and talk with you guys today.
We got a lot to break down and just kind of behind the scenes. You know, we like to put these episodes out once a week so we can kind of stay current on the pulse. So we try to, obviously, for those new listeners to Conduct Detrimental, we try to really do a recap of everything that happened in the past week. It's almost like last week tonight with John Oliver, except it's whenever we get around to recording an episode in that given week. So a lot of things have happened on a number of fronts, but this episode, we're going to have some focus on basketball because today when we're recording this on Tuesday, December 22nd is the opening night of the NBA. So we're going to have some topics there. College sports is very much in the vernacular. And then the one that I've been spending a lot of time touching on social media is the Dan Snyder ongoing saga. So just when Washington won 5 straight games, they are back in the toilet bowl of public relations. So we will get into that. First and foremost, we're going to talk about the big story last week, Kawhi Leonard, a very random lawsuit from some random individual, which we kind of made a joke of. TMZ reported it, that Kawhi Leonard was suing Jerry West, that he was owed $2.5 million because this guy helped the Clippers land Kawhi. We all had a fun laugh until the NBA announced they were launching an investigation into Kawhi. So interesting. So we're going to get into that. That's number one on the docket. Number two on the docket, we're going to talk about Dan Snyder, all things Dan Snyder, his ongoing lawsuit with the minority shareholders of the Washington football team. Some updates with maybe some Dwayne Haskins stuff. But the big one is the sexual assault allegations involving a former employee of the Washington football team, which Dan Snyder allegedly paid $1.6 million. Some very expensive hush money, so we'll get into that. Number three, the late, great Kobe Bryant has been back in the news recently. Number one, obviously, with the opening of basketball, we're getting a lot of Lakers stories about how they did it for Kobe. But the other reason is the lawsuit reason. Vanessa Bryant was sued by her mother, of all people, and there's been some sniping in the media, so we want to get into that. All things Kobe. And last, we spent a large portion of last week's episode talking about the future of college sports. And so Taryn is a law student at Minnesota Law School. And Taryn wrote a paper, in addition to helping us Conduct Detrimental, obviously he knows a lot about sports law, he's very involved, wrote a paper for the Student Sports Law Network website about really where amateurism was going. So we talked about it last week, that it was going to the Supreme Court level. And Taryn is with us to help break down some of the legislation on that front. So with that being said, guys, I can talk all day. Let me turn it over to our first topic. Mike, I kind of gave a little bit of an intro. Why don't you fill us all in on the latest with this Kawhi saga and how it's turned into an NBA investigation?
As you said, a random person, this Johnny Wilkes, came out of the woodworks saying that he is best friends with Kawhi's uncle, which has come up in the past last year with the allegations of tampering. Uncle Dennis.
Uncle Dennis.
As he's called. Yeah. Dennis
Not
Robinson.
Uncle Drew, Uncle Dennis.
Uncle Dennis, yes. So he claims that Jerry West agreed to pay him $2.5 million to bring in Kawhi somehow. When this all kind of surfaced, Kawhi said that was ridiculous. He said that wasn't the reason that he went to LA. He just said that, he grew up in LA. He's from Moreno County, that's where he wanted to be. And that was that. So Johnny Wilkes guy then said that when they were celebrating after signing Kawhi, he again said that he was going to still pay him what he owed him, the $2.5 million for allegedly getting Kawhi to come to the Clippers. I mean, some of these claims are just baseless. I mean, he said that he told Jerry that he had to tell Kawhi that he'll have a great life as a Clipper now and after basketball. He will do whatever it takes to compete with the Lakers against LeBron. This is all the stuff that the Clippers were going to tell him. Every team was probably telling that to Kawhi when they were trying to get him to sign for the team. So that was just ridiculous. I mean, his claims are basically unjust enrichment, saying that, he suffered a cruel and unjust hardship for all the work that he did and that he wouldn't have gone through, jump through so many hoops to help get Kawhi to come to LA. I mean, this whole thing, besides the lawsuit, puts the NBA in an interesting situation because they've already looked into these allegations with Uncle Dennis. They already said that there was no tampering, and they ruled that nothing, came about it. And then now we have to go back to this NBA Constitution, Article 35A, which says that any attempt for these indirect communications made with a player when they're already in a contract with another team is a violation of the Constitution, and then they will suffer penalties, which in the past, these tampering rules are fines that Adam Silver has done. So I think what's interesting about the lawsuit is I think it's in the best interest if something was shady. The Clippers are going to settle. If anything was like possibly there, if the Clippers settle, then what happens is the NBA, they don't have any power to go after anything that happens in that settlement. I mean, there could be a non-disclosure agreement in this settlement, and then the NBA's, for lack of a better term, they're screwed. They don't have to get anything Johnny Wilkes says.
Can I stop you for a second, Mike? Because there's one thing that I keep seeing people with this issue talk about tampering. So as far as I'm concerned, right, Kawhi Leonard at that point in time was a free agent. So tampering rules don't seem to apply to a free agent. So if he's obviously with the Raptors, it's more of an issue, right? Everyone knows he's leaving the Raptors, so whatever. But at the time, he's a free agent. So from a NBA governance standpoint, I don't really see an issue with it. What I do see an issue with is the part, which again, I thought it was really funny, but I guess there might be some truth to it. The allegation that this guy, I'm going to call him random guy, and until there's some validity claim, I'm not calling him Johnny Wilkes. He can just be random guy. But he's alleging that as part of this agreement with Jerry West, who's with the Clippers organization, that he brokered a deal to give Uncle Dennis a private home that I guess the Clippers helped contribute to, and a private expense account. So I think it's kind of the kickback scheme. Almost it's similar to like an AAU scandal. So I don't know. I think that's the dirty part of it. Taryn, where do you kind of weigh in on this?
I couldn't agree with you more. It really does seem like one of those college booster kind of situations where the handler is asking for allegedly some extra inducements. And there was
you don't have to say allegedly on this one. It's not the Dan Snyder topic. We'll say allegedly on that one.
When he was in talks with the Lakers during his free agency, there were sources that were saying that Uncle Dennis did call Jeannie Buss a few times and mentioned these extra inducements, and she basically told him these are illegal and we're not gonna do it. I do find it really interesting. There's just so much smoke around Kawhi's free agency decision to go to LA, and even with what he said that, I grew up here. I love being in LA. I want to be here. There was the big report last year after they got eliminated from the Western Conference Finals, blowing that 3-1 lead, that Kawhi is always late for flights. He lives in San Diego. I mean, for a guy that is from LA or that really wants to be seen as being part of that community, he doesn't want to live there, which I think is interesting. But there's these various issues at stake. And I do think that it's interesting that the NBA investigation is going to continue kind of parallel to the lawsuit.
The Clippers have to be careful about this too, because Kawhi has a player option after the end of this year. So if they screw this up, they could very well lose Kawhi as well. If something goes wrong with the PR around this, I mean, Kawhi will opt out. He has that at the end of this year. So that's something that they have to be very careful with. And you mentioned the Bucks being fined earlier this week. The Bucks were fined last year too with this tampering stuff. I think it was $25,000 when the Bucks co-owner had a couple of comments about Davis. I mean, Silver is he's not afraid to throw these fines out regarding tampering. And then even the beginning of this year, they said that they were going to have heightened penalties for the tampering thing. So
the other thing is that the Clippers gave up a ton of draft capital in order to get Paul George there, in order to really induce Kawhi to sign. And so it might cost them the most if they are unable to keep Kawhi happy. And based on how things ended in San Antonio, it's not necessarily clear that, or it is clear rather, that Kawhi is not really wedded to any of these organizations. He's looking out for what's going to be best for him, and good for him.
I'll put a pin in it. I mean, I was reading, I read way too many these different articles, but probably an interesting subplot in this. Paul George recently signed a long extension to remain with the Clippers. And I guess as part of that, George reached out to Kawhi and said, hey, I'm thinking of signing this contract, and just give him a heads up. So Kawhi was basically quoted as saying, I'm planning to, I don't know the exact quote, I'm paraphrasing, but unless I get hurt, I'm going to decline the player option. Just makes sense. So, to both of your guys' point, I mean, if Kawhi leaves the Clippers after 2 years, I mean, it's just a really bad luck. I just want to, it'd be remiss if we didn't bring this up. So I'm reading from the initial TMZ story. And I guess before I get into this, I think it is so interesting that these NBA reports that were coming out on this, they said that the NBA is launching an investigation based on the TMZ story. So, sometimes TMZ does a service, right? They're getting the story out first. The NBA clearly was not aware of this, but I'm just going to read from the last part of this article, which I think is so funny. Wilkes says Kawhi ultimately agreed to sign with the Clippers in late July, ... He went for his celebratory meal with West and others in Beverly Hills. Wilkes claims West agreed yet again at the dinner to fork over $2.5 million for all the help, but Wilkes claims in the suit he still hasn't received a penny. So I just had so much fun envisioning this. Like, first of all, okay, you say what you want about Jerry West. There is no way he's inviting random guy to dinner, okay? There's a chance, right, if Wilkes is friends with Uncle Dennis, that like maybe Uncle Dennis told him, hey, we're going out to some meal. Why don't you come meet us there? And Wilkes maybe showed up, right? And he's like, hey, Jerry, you owe me my $2.5 million. Like, and then like Jerry's like, sure, crazy Johnny Wilkes, like we'll get you your $2.5 million. Like, I just think that this part being that like little weird snapshot, like I think they thought that was like their ace in the hole. Like, hey, he was at the dinner, but like, I don't know, these entourages that people roll with, like there could be 20 people there. That literally means nothing. And guys, right? If Jerry West just said like, hey, like totally out of context, hey, sure, I'll give you your money, whatever. We got Kawhi. I'm so happy. Like, doesn't really mean anything. So I think the lawsuit, truthfully, is still absolute garbage. But, I do find it interesting. It's not something that I've ever seen, that the NBA is launching an investigation based on a TMZ story. So give some credit to TMZ. They came across this. So now our second topic. I think that this is probably the main story. I mean, if we had to pick, maybe we'll do superlatives at the end of the year. But I think the Dan Snyder saga with the Redskins has probably been the biggest story in sports for like the last half of the year. There's just, I mean, maybe it's just Washington football team, but it's like everything from Darius Geist to the name change. It's just, to the toxic culture, now to these bombshell text messages. It's just like the franchise is cursed. I mean, like, I don't really know what other way to say it. It's just like, it's just a drip of really bad news. Okay, so I'm going to give the gist of it. We basically had 4 different developments since we last recorded. So what happened, Dan Snyder's currently involved in litigation. We've touched on this lawsuit before. Minority owners are trying to sell their shares in Washington football team, and they tried to sell those shares a couple months ago, really in the midst of this, the report of the toxic workplace, the sexual allegations involving coworkers. There was a number of firings done. So they tried to sell a while ago. I guess they were trying to line up buyers, but they couldn't. And part of the reason they couldn't is because Dan Snyder was blocking the sale to other people. Just kind of keep that in mind. So that lawsuit exists. It's been going on for a couple weeks, couple months. And the Washington Post and the NFL both filed motions to intervene in that lawsuit. Washington Post said, hey, this is newsworthy. We want to know what's going on. We want to know this stuff behind the scenes. They shouldn't have a seal of, secrecy behind these, what should be public documents for a lawsuit. So Washington Post won that lawsuit. They got awarded documents very recently, I think probably about a week and a half ago. A number of documents came out of that. The one that I know Taryn thought was very interesting, I did as well. We'll say a very thinly veiled blackmail, extortion, whatever you want to call it. The attorney that's representing the minority shareholders in the team basically sent Dan Snyder a text message that in a way says, what I know, I can make this a shit show. It's the, and I'm going to mess up the quote, but it's the really bad stuff that I know. So that tells you that there's more to come. So I guess that's number one in the story today. We knew that there were allegations of improper conduct, maybe with some sexism in the organization and maybe some sexual misconduct with respect to other employees that have since been let go from the team. We did not know that any of those allegations directly tied to Dan Snyder's conduct. And that's the news today. I kind of alluded to at the front, a $1.6 million hush money that's being paid to a former coworker regarding incident on Snyder's private plane, which is by no means a good look. On the same day, not necessarily relevant to sports law, just, when it rains, it pours. Dwayne Haskins, who at one point in the recent history was the QB of the future, he goes to a strip club without a mask on the day after the game, and now he's apologizing. And then, maybe the worst of all of them, there's a report that Dan Snyder is thinking of making Washington football team the permanent name change. So, Taryn, let me toss it to you. What do you make of this whole saga? I don't even know where to start.
A little about me. I grew up a fan of this organization. Unfortunately, I'm from the DC area. And so, yeah, I grew up rooting for this team. So it's nothing new, I guess. And for a long time, Washington fans were clamoring for Bruce Allen to get the axe, former president, thinking that would lead to some change. And to some extent it has. But really, this fish is rotten from the head down. So like you mentioned, there's these two opposite issues that are really like converging here. So you have the sale that is trying to happen. So these investors who own 40% of the team, Snyder himself owns about 40% of the team. His sister owns 12%. His mother owns like 6%. So he is the controlling shareholder and he has all of the voting rights. So when these minority shareholders who hold about 40% of the team told him in May that they wanted to sell the team, he kicked them off the board and denied them access to financial records. So that's
totally normal. I mean, like all owners hate they're the minor. Totally normal. Totally Dan Snyder.
They kicked them off the board and because he has all the voting rights. And the $900 million sale that you mentioned earlier, they were going to sell that 40% to some California-based investors, and Snyder has been blocking the sale. So that's what the suit is about. And currently the NFL's arbitration efforts have been enjoined as a result of that. So they're going to let this court proceeding, which was filed in the U.S. District Court in Maryland, go forward. So when the 15 women came forward in the Washington Post article in June that they had been the targets of sexual harassment by former executives with the team. And then there was an additional 25 women, including some cheerleaders, who said that they were also the subject of sexual harassment. So it was during that investigation by Beth Wilkinson that discovered these documents of this $1.6 million settlement. And so at that time, then David Donovan, who's the former general counsel for the then Redskins, sued Beth Wilkinson and tried to stop her from disclosing this confidential settlement. And then later, Mr. Donovan dropped that case, but they're going to allow those documents to be released with very minor redactions. So this is a really interesting situation because we were talking about the Clippers earlier. We never really got to find out whether the NBA could have or would have forced Donald Sterling to sell the Clippers because it was settled in probate court, and Shelley Sterling was all for selling the team. Now, in 2016-17, there was an SI article that detailed 4 different instances of inappropriate workplace conduct by Jerry Richardson, the then owner of the Panthers. And that led to the NFL more or less forcing the sale of that franchise to David Tepper. So Dan and Mike, do you see the NFL going that way, or do you think that Dan Snyder is safe for now?
In the same context that they were so hesitant to get rid of the team name Redskins, Snyder is going to do everything he possibly can to not sell the team. I mean, it could get to a point. Dan, you mentioned TMZ getting some bombshell information. I mean, the Washington Post is having one hell of a year. I mean, their bombshell articles are, every time they come up, it is just mind-blowing. So this $1.6 million settlement, Taryn, you said the redactions are going to be minor. I don't believe that. They're fighting over this redaction right now. That is going to be completely blocked out. I think it's going to be the opposite, where minimal information is going to be viewed by the public. It's basically going to say $1.6 million was handed over. That's it. Like, I don't know. There's going to be an extreme fight on that. And whatever comes about that, I think the NFL can definitely force Snyder's hand, force this minority, the minority sale and the sale of the Washington football team. Whoever wants to buy such a bleak name like that,
the division leading Washington football team.
Not for long. Not for long. So there was an interesting conversation that somebody dropped or somebody asked me. I was thinking about it. So, you don't get $1.6 million unless there is, we'll say, an non-disclosure agreement, what we'd call an NDA. So you pay at 1.6, just so everyone realizes, like, that's an obscene amount of money to pay for a private settlement. Like, even at the Harvey Weinstein saga, and obviously there's been numbers of people being paid to like be quiet, but $1.6 million seems to be an outlier. It seems to be a very high number. So obviously attached to that is a provision that says if you talk about the case, you'd have to pay us back 1.6, or sometimes some of these contracts, not only do you have to pay 1.6, you have to pay a penalty on top of that. So, there's everyone that signs these has a number. You have 1.6 million reasons not to break the NDA. So that being said, this is a 2009 incident. So obviously something, this is now 11 years later. What could have possibly caused this to come to the surface? Oh, the NFL's investigation into the Washington football team. Now, this former employee, right, we've never heard of this, right? This, as far as I know, I don't think the NFL was aware of this beforehand. So this came up during the course of the employment, or the investigation. So somebody asked me, is the woman going to have to fork back over the 1.6? And I said, well, just because the NFL and now we are aware of the issue of this, the fact of this settlement and maybe some details relating to it, it doesn't mean that she was the one that broke the terms of that agreement. So it's possible, right? If I'm Dan Snyder's number 2 or number 3 in the organization, I might just have known about that lawsuit and maybe I let it slip at some point during my conversations with the NFL. I am not exactly sure what happened, but keep that in mind. When the NFL is coming up against you, like we've talked about this in prior episodes, sometimes if you're like the Houston Astros situation, it makes sense to say absolutely nothing because, the NFL by itself has no subpoena power. But somebody let it slip because this was not something we knew about before. So now, Taryn, to your initial question, from what I remember about Jerry Richardson, Donald Sterling is a little bit of a different boat. And I think, Mike, what I thought you were going to say, I think TMZ broke the Donald Sterling tape. I think they had that tape with
V. Stiviano,
but they had that recorded tape. So yeah, TMZ was at the heart of this. But he said some racist things, and in our culture, that's worthy of cancellation. Obviously, Sterling had a longer history, so it wasn't as different as maybe different other topics. But with Richardson, he a little bit different. It was more of a racial tone, but it was like an old school racist. Just he was just institutionalized racism, similar to Sterling. Now, this is it's different. I don't know if it's worse or if it's better. I mean, you can make the argument that it's worse, but this is an owner of a team directly involved with a sexual assault allegation regarding one of its employees. I've never heard of someone in professional sports having that type of allegation. So it's pretty scary if you're Dan Snyder to be the first to set a precedent, right? If you're an owner, there's an allegation or there is some potential truth to committing sexual assault against one of your employees, what happens? We don't know. And you never want to be the first, especially in this day and age where cancel culture does exist for better or for worse. So I think, and I don't mean to get your hopes up, Taryn, as a Washington football fan, but I think that this is the character and nature of an allegation, if established, that could force the NFL's hand. This is not incompetent ownership like the Wilpons. This is something pretty messy. And it's like, guys, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stories that are all coming out of Washington. So at a certain point, Goodell's going to have to step in. It doesn't matter that the Washington market is one of the main markets in football. It's a black spot on the NFL. So it wouldn't shock me if there was some serious ramifications directly against Dan Snyder that came as this.
And I also just want to add that when the initial story breaks in July, I think that it's really interesting that the statement that's released by ownership at that point is both Dan and his wife, Tanya. And ordinarily, a lot of the other statements that he's made when he was like, basically, we're not going to change the team over my dead body kind of statement. Never. You can print it. He makes those statements on his own. But in this instance, it's suddenly convenient for him to make it on behalf of he and on behalf of Tanya. So I think that it's so clear that there is just a wretched culture in that front office. And at best, he ignored it. And at worst, he was actively participating in and fostering that sort of culture. So, yeah, I do think that it's in the NFL's best interest, and they could really revitalize this market. This is always going to be when I was growing up, people used to say there's a Redskins town and whoever's winning second. And the other teams have been winning recently. The Caps won a Stanley Cup. The Nats won a World Series. The Wizards made the playoffs. This could be a Washington team again, but it's not right now.
Speaking of those Wizards, Taryn, I am all aboard the Wizards hype train. Let's go over 33 wins. I'm taking it. The bar is set very low.
They're gonna win 45 games, and they're gonna upset the Bucks in the first round.
Do you realize that there's only 72 games of the season? Okay, 45 is saying a lot.
Oh my goodness, never mind. Sorry, yeah.
45 is that's the best team in the NBA.
No, but 45 out of 82.
45 out of 82 is okay, 500 big, but that's like a 60.
39. Pretty good.
I agree with everything you said, and I think I actually do. I wasn't necessarily just joking. The fact that the owner of right now, let's say we didn't talk about any of these sexual assault allegations, anything that they failed to honor Sean Taylor for about however many years. I think it's been 13 years. This is the first year they're honoring Sean Taylor. There's a lot of things that the Redskins Washington football team have done over the years. On top of all of this, I mentioned the last update that we have on Washington football team saga was a report from Dan Snyder that he is strongly considering making the Washington football team the permanent team name. Don't mention anything else. If you don't follow the National Football League and you just popped in one day and you're someone's girlfriend that doesn't follow sports and you looked at all the team names, what is football team? That's the worst name for a NFL franchise I've ever heard of. Who came up with such a stupid name? Whoever thought of that should be fired. And that person that came up with that name is Dan Snyder. Don't tell me anything else that we just spoke about. That by itself should show that the man is senile. Okay, allegedly senile. Okay, because Dan Snyder's out here suing everybody left and right. Allegedly senile.
Premature senility.
I think if it walks like a duck and it's crazy like a duck, it's a crazy duck named Dan Snyder. Okay, moving on to our third topic of the day, a story that is near and dear to I think all of us. We all grew up with Kobe Bryant in some way, shape, or form. So Kobe Bryant, we've touched upon this a lot. We won't. We'll refer you back to the old episodes. Maybe we'll put those in the show notes if you want a full history of the Kobe Bryant saga. But where we're at now, there have been two separate lawsuits filed by Vanessa Bryant, Kobe's wife. One was for the wrongful death action. The other was against it's an invasion of privacy suit against the sheriff's department for illicit crash site photos. And now the first lawsuit filed against Vanessa Bryant. Now it's not necessarily a countersuit. It is a lawsuit filed by all people by Vanessa Bryant's mom. So, I just want to get into it. It's an interesting lawsuit. I mean, not necessarily so in sports though, but I do want to follow this. I think this Vanessa Bryant lawsuit, it's one I do think that's going to go to trial. And all these little pieces, right? These are all pieces that the jury is going to look at for Vanessa Bryant's character. And whether we want to or not, that's how jury selection works. We look at character, we look at people's aspirations. And with respect to the Vanessa Bryant first two lawsuits, I'm not of this opinion, but I've seen it enough that people think that Vanessa Bryant shouldn't be suing. She should allow the other surviving crash members, the family members from the crash, to sue because she has, Kobe passed away with an estate worth $600 million. So these are the type of things that people, I don't necessarily know why there are Vanessa Bryant bashers, but I know that they exist. So I'm just going to read from part of the story. So Sophia Lane is Vanessa's mother. So I guess she's been a babysitter in the house for a number of years. So she filed a lawsuit basically for unpaid wages that she had been a babysitter for a number of years. And basically she's alleging that Vanessa threw out of the house and didn't pay her these statements. So this is a response from Vanessa. In reality, she only occasionally babysat my older girls when they were toddlers. As of 10 years ago, our kids were full-time students and athletes, and I didn't have another child till 2016. Her claims are obviously false, but I still tried repeatedly to work things out with my mother. And now just her response, and I'll give it to you, Mike. This is from Lane. This is from Vanessa's mother. I would like to state that I do not enjoy airing our family grievances in the public. Although I filed a lawsuit, I did not make any public comments and was hoping for the court process to run its course without the publicity, as hurtful as it is. I did not want this, and I do not want this. I think, we were coming up with topics for the show. And again, I think this Vanessa Bryant lawsuit, if we don't have it in 2021, we'll have it in 2022. It's must-see television, right? We're going to have all the emotions of Kobe Bryant. I don't think this is a case that's really possible to settle just because of the amount of money and controversy in these insurance policies. So this is usually one that gets pretty close to trial. So we're probably going to have depositions in this. So all these little breadcrumbs, I think are very important. So, it's not necessarily a direct sports law tie-in, but I do think it's relevant to the Kobe Bryant narrative and a lawsuit that I do think will be very big in the sports law vernacular. So, Mike, let me toss it to you with this. At its core, right, this is almost, it's not really breach of contract, right? If anything, it's like unjust enrichment, maybe it's promissory estoppel. What do you think? Is there any merits to this lawsuit?
To start, you like we said, tonight was the NBA tip-off, and the Lakers did reveal their championship ring with Kobe and Kobe's legacy and their engravings with Kobe and 24. With this lawsuit, this is crazy. And again, we're going back to TMZ. TMZ is getting all the scoops. They're getting all the comments on what Sophia and what Vanessa are saying back and forth.
This podcast is not sponsored by TMZ.
Not sponsored by TMZ.
Yeah. Go ahead.
If you just look at it on its face, it looks like she's asking for child support. She supposedly took care of Vanessa and Kobe's kids for 18 straight years or 12 hours a day. I mean, all the monetary allegations, it breaks down to $96 an hour. Vanessa is like, this is ridiculous. This is, you're extorting a financial windfall. It's right now, all this is, it's like he said versus she said. I mean, I guess it would be she said versus she said, but it just seems like they're kind of bickering back and forth, which is really unfortunate in light of Kobe's legacy. And I think that's where there's a lot of people that are bashing Vanessa, but I think that's where also people are on Vanessa's side, where it's like, why would her mother be doing this? What lack of empathy, cruel punishment is this? And I remember there was the issue back when Vanessa, supposedly kicked her mother out of the house. But then again, TMZ gets the scoop that Vanessa said that her mother contacted her through intermediaries, alleging that she lost or that Vanessa changed her phone number. And Vanessa's saying, oh, I didn't change my phone number. And that through these intermediaries, her mother was demanding $5 million, a house, and a Mercedes SUV. So again, it just seems like there's a lot of conjecture and I want this, I deserve this. And then Vanessa again was like, where's this $96 an hour coming from? But apparently, again, TMZ, Lane comes back and says that, well, Vanessa completed a rental application when she kicked me out of the house without my knowledge. And she said that I was apparently being paid $200,000 per year. And that's where they came up with this $96 an hour figure based on Vanessa filling out this rental application for her mother to get out of the house. So the claims are all over the place, and almost like she's grasping at straws. She's, $600 million estate. Again, the Vanessa bashers are just like, some people are just like, just pay her to, I guess, shut her up. I mean, you got the money, who cares? It's her, it is her mother, but
maybe that's the only reason.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, okay. So again, this, first of all, Mike, fantastic fact finding. I don't know where you found that little nugget about the application, but we have a nanny. We do not pay her $96 an hour. She's fantastic. I don't know if any nanny is $96 an hour fantastic. I don't even know if I make $96 an hour. That's a lot of money, $96 an hour. I mean, I'm working 24 hours a day. No one's paying me $96 an hour, but then neither here nor there. So, Taryn, I wanted to, again, we want the sports law tie in here. Vanessa, she's done a number of things, right? The Kobe and Gianna Helicopter Safety Act. She's really been an advocate for safety and trying to turn this negative into a positive. She's kind of been out there and showing new tattoos of Kobe. So she's out there in the public sphere. So Taryn, I want you to pretend that you were a Los Angeles County juror, right? You've sneaked your way into the jury room, even though you do not live in Los Angeles. Just pretend you did. What do you, and let's say you're not a basketball fan, right? You're just kind of someone from the outside. What are your thoughts on Vanessa just seeing this lawsuit? Does this impact your thoughts on her as a person and her, and the potential that maybe, just in the back of your head, maybe you're not going to award her, you're going to say, hey, I'm not going to give her, the stars and the moon. I'm going to give her a more reasonable settlement, right? For any number of reasons. Maybe the fact that she has $600 million, maybe the fact that there's this weird, is any of this impacting your analysis?
Yeah, well, I would have hoped that they would have done a better evaluation of who they were letting into the jury if I knew all of this information ahead of time. But
the rule is, as long as you can remain impartial, so you can acknowledge that you have all these outside factors, but as long as you can say, I know this, but I can remain impartial. That's a fun fact for you guys for jury selection with my one trial under my belt. So I knew that.
Remaining impartial. From a human perspective, I think that the most kind, nice light to view this in for Vanessa's sake is that she's a person going through a terrible tragedy, lost her daughter and her husband at the same time, and needing to not only carry on their legacies, but also deal with her children that she still has, and apparently her family issues. So I feel bad for her, honestly, me personally. And that's how I would feel if I were in the jury room. The other way of looking at it is, okay, like she has a lot of money already, and she's clearly like having some sort of money disputes, and maybe she's not treating her mother well. I don't know. It seems weird to me that all of this is being discussed in the public sphere. How much conversation happened to the point where they were just saying, like, okay, we can't talk to each other anymore. We have to do it through intermediaries. Because if you take it from Vanessa's point of view, she says that she offered to give her mother monthly support for the rest of her life, which I don't know, that's a pretty good deal. But then she's arguing that
it's a very good deal. Isn't that what she wants?
Yeah. No, it's what I want right now. I want someone to monthly support me the rest of my life. But
$96 an hour forever, just like to sneak into oblivion. Fine. I don't need to talk about sports anymore. Just pay me.
Yeah. And so, yeah, my thought is that she's a person going through a very rough time, and there's no way that we could possibly know everything that's going on. And I don't think that the jury's going to know that much more than what we know right now. So I would hope that they wouldn't hold it against her too much and take everything for a fact.
Before we move on to our final topic, let's stay on basketball for a second. Not an official topic. The Lakers, I think, were plus 250 to repeat as the NBA champions. This is a sports law podcast, so we could talk a little bit of sports. It was very heavy on the law. Does anybody not like the Lakers? Is there any other team that people like here? I mean, I'm seeing the Lakers look pretty good to repeat.
Yeah, I think that they got better. I think Harrell is a really good glue guy, and I think he's going to give them some tough minutes. Giannis is great. Milwaukee made some moves in the offseason. I would like to see them make the finals just because I really like Giannis.
I mean, liking him is not a good enough reason, okay? We need some.
He's a great player.
Yeah, but I mean, like.
And the contract dispute is behind him.
True. Well, I will say, Mike, I do want to hear your NBA thoughts, but I will say there is a fantastic podcast, which I like recommending these. The Giannis Draft podcast. A friend of the show, or maybe future friend of the show, Woj, did a wonderful job digging into the history of Giannis. Really kind of a rags to riches story. He was like selling sunglasses in the street. He had these like grainy videos, like he didn't, which I thought was crazy. I thought it was bizarre. His agent, he didn't even know. He just like some random agent was like collecting different international players, and like somehow Giannis ended up on his list. So I don't know. So the whole
that's still his agent now?
I'm going to say 80% yes. At least that was his agent all the way up and through the draft.
That's great for him. Good business. Can you tell me who the Wizards took in that draft?
I mean, I'm a newfound Wizards fan. I have no idea.
I think it was Jan Besley. I think they took Jan Besley, number 6 overall.
Mike, I have my other basketball bets, but any particular basketball futures or things in the NBA you're looking forward to?
Well, I don't think you want to hear my NBA takes, because I have been trusting this damn process for so long that I think Philadelphia will implode before they win any single championship. So will the Lakers repeat? Probably. Does everything that comes out of the bet odds on paper work out? No, the Jets won. But I mean, you've got to look at the two best players. I mean, LeBron is fading, but he's still top tier player paired with the greatest big in the NBA right now. I mean, Anthony Davis, if he stays healthy, there's no way that they don't at least make it to the finals. It's wild to me. And Giannis is definitely MVP, repeat MVP. But he has no support unless somehow James Harden makes his way onto the Bucks. I think right now we're sitting at another Lakers championship.
Or Mike, I mean, I'm not sure why. Maybe it's the pessimist in you. I think Harden, the team that he is angling toward, is the Philadelphia 76ers. So that can mean goodbye Ben Simmons. Hello, Beard.
I can't get rid of Ben Simmons.
I think what's going to happen, Daryl Morey is going to clean house. He's going to get rid of Embiid. He's going to get rid of Simmons. He's going to get rid of all the draft picks. And they're going to redo the process. I'm just totally kidding. Okay. I just want to have this on the podcast just in case I end up being right. Bol 27-1 for Rookie of the Year. That is my sneaky bet because he is secretly eligible. Okay, let us transition to our fourth and final topic. That is anything and everything at the NCAA NIL conversation. So again, last week we spoke about name, image, and likeness really being litigated in the courts. And now we wanted to obviously have Taryn on, and Taryn will talk a little bit about his paper, but we want to talk about name, image, and likeness really in the legislative process. So that's really with the College Athlete Bill of Rights. That's Cory Booker's legislation. And Taryn, I know you can speak it much more eloquently than I can. So why don't you kind of break it down and kind of explain, maybe the intricacies of that bill and the process of maybe weeding out those differences with the other bills that are presently on the table?
Yeah, so we were talking about parallel issues that were moving forward in different contexts. I think that this is another instance of parallel issues. So you guys did a great job of talking about the Alston case last week. I'm really excited to see how that turns out. Judge Wilkin in the Ninth Circuit, I think that her decisions have been really good for player rights, and this has been a movement that's been going on forever. And so there are these parallel issues, and the Alston case, I think, will get settled at the Supreme Court. And I really hope that they do allow education funding to be uncapped. I think that that's a great thing for student athletes, and it really emphasizes the student portion of student athletes that isn't necessarily being emphasized if you consider that they're being steered away from certain majors. And I think that that's one interesting thing. So this week, Senator Booker from New Jersey, who played college football at Stanford, he published a bill which is called the College Athletes Bill of Rights. And so that includes things like scholarship protection, one-time free transfers at least, I think. It also includes some security for health and allowing players to seek medical care 5 years after their careers are over. It also includes a profit sharing, revenue sharing model where the schools would have to share 50% of their revenue to the athletes in these sports. And I think that that's going to be a no-go, but it does seem interesting. For a long time now, the NCAA's approach has been, let's not pay the players. That'll ruin the amateurism model. We shouldn't do that at all. And then their other approach was, in the alternative, we need one national law. So they've been pleading with Congress to sort of implement something like this that would allow them to be in charge and really secure their position within a new model that allows for player compensation. There's 4 or so bills that are currently out there. Another notable one in the House is with Representative Anthony Gonzalez, who played for the Ohio State Buckeyes and was a wide receiver on their football team there, and then played in the NFL, and now he's a congressman in Ohio. So he's worked on a bill that allows for name, image, and likeness, and except for like gambling companies, cannabis, alcohol, so certain vice companies you wouldn't be able to sign with. That's one of them. And then another one, Senator Roger Wicker, a Republican from Mississippi, has a bill that would allow the Federal Trade Commission to oversee name, image, and likeness. So there's a ton of different approaches, and we were discussing before we hopped on here, but the process, I guess, from now is that these bills will go through committee, and the ones that survive, I think that they will meet in the middle somewhere and have some sort of compromise. And so that's completely separate from the current issue that's at the Supreme Court level. The Supreme Court issue, which you guys talked about last week, is an antitrust issue. And it's also about those education funds that we were talking about earlier. So this is about the players seeking their ability to be compensated. Sports that aren't regulated by the NCAA, cheerleading most notably, those student athletes are able to use their name, image, and likeness and, shill for companies. And that's a great way for them to make money. At the same time, regular students, if I were more notable, I would be able to sign a licensing agreement with somebody and advertise for Reese's or whatever.
There's a lot to unpack here, and I'm going to have a 2-part answer to some of your statements there. First, Dan and I talked about this last week. This is a bipartisan approach. Everybody's in favor at this point for student athletes to be compensated. It's long overdue, and I think now there's just this kind of throw everything at the wall and see what sticks approach. I mean, you have, like you said, there's a number of different bills that are coming at it from different angles, but the goal of the NCAA in the long run was to get a federal bill so it would be more in favor of them. I mean, even the Athletes Bill of Rights here, it has a 9-member commission that's going to give them subpoena power. I'm using air quotes, to ensure compliance. That gives the NCAA a lot more power than they already had, which was already endless. And then the NCAA is going to modify their bylaws, and then it's just going to be the same thing, where you're just going to abide by whatever the NCAA bylaws are. My second point was what you were talking about with whether it's cheerleaders or golfers or some of these non-major sports, I guess you could call them. That was the issue that was also discussed in the Alston case, because there are extra permissible benefits that some of these other student athletes already have access to. You could be a golfer and make $10,000 a year from from winnings on tournaments and things like that. You could be a cheerleader or a gymnast and go and make it to the U.S. Olympic team and make revenue off of that. There are waivers for that. So there already was these extra permissible benefits. Student athletes were able to take advantage of that. The big athletes that actually bring in, I guess you would say, the most amount of money for these schools, being the football players, the basketball players, they didn't have that access. So I guess in that sense, that this is helpful for them. But when you think about also what was discussed in the Alston case, the whole purpose of student athletes not being paid, besides the amateurism, was this division of a regular student. I went to a D3 school, not whatever. But even my time at Syracuse Law School, like walking around, that was a big D1 school. The division of regular students and student athletes. The discussions was, when you pay student athletes, it divides them and they are no longer a regular student. Again, using air quotes. That was torn apart by Judge Wilkin, because she said, if you go to any major D1 campus, regular students do not have access to the facilities that student athletes have access to. You're already putting a giant wedge in between student athletes and regular students. So the whole thing is ridiculous. It's coming to a point now. Everybody knows it's going to happen. And Dan and you and I talked about this last week. It's just when is it going to happen and how is it going to look? And now we have different branches of government all discussing this. It's overwhelmingly in favor of student athletes. What do you think, Dan?
I was kind of vocal about it. Like, I do think that just the tides of society are pushing towards athlete compensation. Now, kind of as a brief aside, everyone that I talk to, right, has kind of said it's just a matter of, how much athletes should get paid. It's not whether or not they should or should not get paid. It's just that, they should, whether it's going to be a full free market or whether it's be some type of reasonable cap at, whatever it is, 6 figures or 5 figures, whatever it might be. So that said, I got a call last week from a news outlet to do a TV interview, which I was all excited about doing on this particular topic on the Supreme Court level. And, it wasn't on you guys know me, I watch ESPN, I watch Fox Sports. I don't usually watch the news. I don't usually watch Fox News. So this was posted on their YouTube account. So I started reading the comments, and the comments were essentially along the lines of, why is the Supreme Court taking a case about athlete compensation when there's an issue of election fraud, right? Well, maybe there are more important things in the country other than whether athletes should get paid. So, I mean, listen, I'm not going to weigh in on election fraud or not election fraud, because that's very much outside of my wheelhouse. But there is this interesting question of, right, for however many years in our country, athletes could not get paid, right? So I think we're all kind of saying legislation is going to push this in the right vicinity, right? At some point, athletes are going to get paid. And right, it's going to be 2021 is the earliest that Florida can do it. That's the first state. I guess on a large level, I mean, I love the Supreme Court that has intervened here, and right, and the Supreme Court's taking this issue up, because that's going to give us a lot to talk about for, another couple of months. But, not just something I hadn't thought of. Maybe there are more important things in the country than the Supreme Court taking up an issue of athlete compensation. Now, I will say this. So people are asking me where I think the Supreme Court's going to come down. On that same vein, if the Supreme Court is taking the athlete compensation case, they obviously see some issue with it, right? So they're either saying that the lower court didn't go far enough in terms of picking apart the antitrust defense, or they're going to say that, hey, the NCAA really deserves this antitrust defense, that it shouldn't be a quasi carve-out, that it should be the real thing. So I'm just pointing out, like, the NCAA, the Supreme Court doesn't take this case unless they're going to do something drastic. I just don't see that making any sense. So, I mean, it's going to be historical. It's going to be precedent setting one way or the other, but let's just not assume that they're taking it to kind of like, bring it all home, right? Like, it just, I don't know. I can see a world where they come in and they defend the prior dicta that kind of carved out an NCAA antitrust defense. I don't want that to happen, but I can't rule it out.
So help me God if they give a baseball exemption-esque
They might.
antitrust. I can't.
I don't think it's going to be that explicit, but you were talking about dicta, and there is. And the most recent time that they had taken an NCAA case was, and I think you guys touched on this last time, but NCAA versus Board of Regents for the University of Oklahoma. And that case is about TV dollars, but it's also another antitrust case because the NCAA was totally in control of the games that were going to be shown and the TV packages, much to their own detriment by doing that. The NCAA rarely gets out of its own way. So if they do grant them antitrust exemption, I think that they're really saving them from really making the game more equitable. And if you want to talk about stopping the steal, we need to be stopping the steal from the unpaid labor of the student athletes. And the Donald that we should be considering is Donald Delahaye, who is a UCF kicker, and he monetized his YouTube page, and the NCAA cut his scholarship. And you want to talk about a difference between regular students and student athletes. Okay, a regular student can monetize their YouTube page. They do it all the time. There's so many monetized YouTube pages for these students that are totally normal students. And why are they able to make money off of their likeness when these student athletes who are putting in the hours, putting in the work, why are they not able to? Now, the other thing I was going to ask you guys, this athlete bill of rights that Senator Booker has put forth, it calls for this 50% revenue sharing where the major revenue sports, that would be Division I basketball and Division I FBS football, those would have to share their money, their revenues with the players 50-50. Do you guys think that that's just a non-starter, or is that really just to drum up support?
It's such a drastic shift from what we know. But at the end of the day, it's not that crazy because in our professional sports where the athletes are making, basically have a 50% of the revenue, and they also get paid salaries. So maybe if anything, right, if you're only getting 50-50, it's a 50-50 share in college and you're not getting paid, right, like $27 or $40 million, whatever these players are getting. There's a version of that's fair, but then there's also, maybe a level, and Taryn, we were talking about this offline, you aim high and then you try to figure out how much you can get in. If you aim really high for a 50-50 revenue split, if people are kind of uncomfortable with that, maybe that gets parsed down maybe to 25% or maybe to 10%. I think it's not a crazy offer on the extreme end of the ask. So yeah, I don't mind it by any means. I'm all about player empowerment. I think you ask for the moon and see what you can land on.
There's 100% going to be pushback with that. The 50-50, I think, is great. It's definitely student athlete empowerment, and the whole NCAA model is that it is a nonprofit, and then all the money is get pumped back into the athletics and whatnot. But you have an issue of how that money is also going to be distributed. Okay, and then you talk about big name college coaches who make $5, $6, $7 million. I don't know how a school is going to divvy up this money. I don't know. I definitely agree that there's going to be pushback on the profit sharing, especially going into the argument, not to get down this rabbit hole, but going into the argument of student athletes being employees. So now they're actually legitimately making money off of their athlete. That's the whole issue that the NCAA wants to avoid. So I don't even think the NCAA is kind of on board with that. I think there's going to be pushback.
Yeah, I touch on the issue of unions also in the paper and talk about Kane Coulter. And I just wanted to plug the paper. You can look up the Student Sports Law Network. It's on their sports blog, BLAWG, and read about it there. It's just a primer on the entire issue. Yeah, I think at the very least, the players need some sort of trade group. I think that would help them, even if they can't collectively bargain. It could help them organize their thoughts.
With that being said, Taryn, it was lovely having you on. Mike, back-to-back weeks, and we'll see if Dan is still in hiding. Dan is actually, jokes aside, I asked Dan what he was doing next week for the recording, and he said he was going to be in Siberia. I thought he was kidding, but he's actually going to be in Siberia. His in-laws are over there. So, Yeah, Dan is in Siberia. So if we get an episode next week, it'll be probably a recap episode of the stories of the year. So yeah, stay tuned for that. But one way or another, you always get another episode from us week by week, unless we do 3 live episodes in a row. Then we take an episode off. Mike, Taryn, anything to say before we put this episode officially in the books?
Yeah, Dan Wallach is definitely like a secret agent, right?
If he was saying he was. I mean, this is almost. I'm going to paraphrase, but he said, "I'm working on a project that's going to change the sports betting world as we know it, and I'm going to Siberia." So I don't know. It's decent. It's decent evidence right there. It's decent evidence. Mike?
I think Siberia is definitely a cover-up. I also thought he was joking when he said Siberia. I was like, yeah, I'll be in Siberia. That's like one of those places that you're just like, Siberia equals Timbuktu. If you say Timbuktu, like that's Siberia. So same thing.
I was joking with Dan. I told him I thought he was just making it up, and he goes, "No, my in-laws are really from there." And he told the story that Dan married obviously his wife is lovely from Siberia, his in-laws from there. So he goes, I guess his friend said, "Dan, if only you could have married someone from Hawaii, that would have been so much nicer this time of the year." For Dan, who is not here, Dan Wallach, as always, is on Twitter and Instagram at Wallach Legal. Myself, Dan Lust at Sports Law Lust. Mike is at Mike_son_of_law.
Spot on.
Oh, and Taryn at TK Sharma Law.
Nailed it.
Boom. Okay, team. So for all of us here, the Conduct Detrimental family, wishing everybody a very happy holidays, whatever you are celebrating. And you'll hear us from us again before the new year. But that being said, we will put this in the books and we will see you next week on another episode. Conduct Detrimental.